There was nothing more he could do. His mother was dying. At exactly midnight, Sipho stood at the edge of the bush. The air grew thick and smelled of ozone, wood smoke, and roasted wild chestnuts. A low, rhythmic drumming vibrated through the soles of his feet, though there was no drummer in sight. Suddenly, the darkness parted. Before him stretched a vibrant, terrifying avenue of stalls, lit by the soft, eerie glow of floating fireflies. The traders were silhouettes of shadow and bone. A woman with eyes like polished silver coins sold clay pots filled with bottled thunderstorms. Next to her, a man whose voice sounded like dry autumn leaves offered woven baskets that promised to never empty of maize. Sipho swallowed his fear and walked down the glowing aisle, his boots crunching on the dry earth. He stopped at a stall tended by an old woman wrapped in a traditional leopard skin blanket. Her face was hidden, but her hands were long, skeletal, and stained with the juice of wild berries. "I need healing," Sipho whispered, his voice trembling. "For my mother." The old woman chuckled, a sound like grinding stones. "The medicine of the ancestors is expensive, boy. What do you have to trade?" 18-year-old Sipho, desperate to save his dying mother. He walked into the thornveld to find a place where you can buy anything, if you are willing to pay with your soul. Welcome back to Silver Phoenix African Tales. Pull up a chair, dim your lights, and let's step into the midnight market. The moon over the Limpopo province did not look like the moon of other places. In the high summer, when the heat refused to leave the earth even after the sun had dropped behind the Soutpansberg Mountains, the sky curdled. The moon hung heavy, low, and stained a deep, bruised orange, the color of a dying fire or drying blood. In the village of Marula Ridge, this sky was a warning. Marula Ridge was a place caught between two worlds. To the east, the modern world hummed along the tarred R524 highway, where long-distance trucks roared toward the border, their headlights cutting through the night. But if you turned off the tar and drove 5 kilometers down a gravel track that grew narrower and meaner with every turn, you found the village. Here, the homes were a mix of modern brick houses and traditional round huts with thatch roofs that smelled of old grass and wood smoke. Here, the bushveld did not feel like a postcard. It felt like an observer. By 10 o'clock in the evening, the village began to quiet down. By 11 o'clock, the golden rule of Marula Ridge took effect. It was a rule passed down from the time when the elephants still owned the valleys. You lock your wooden doors, you slide the iron bolts across the frames, you draw the curtains tight over the glass, even if the heat inside the room makes your skin slick with sweat. And no matter what you hear, whether it is the sound of a child crying in the thornveld, the laughter of an old friend standing by your water tank, or the rhythm of drums that makes the dirt floor vibrate beneath your sleeping mat, you do not look outside. The night does not belong to the living, the elders would say, their voices dropping low as they sat around the dying embers of the evening fires. We have the sun, they have the dark. A wise man does not try to share a meal with the spirit. Sipho did not have the luxury of being wise. He was 18 years old, with the lean, muscular build of a boy who spent his afternoons chopping mopani wood and chasing stray goats out of the vegetable patches. He had plans to study engineering in Polokwane the following year. He had a matrix certificate with distinctions sitting inside a plastic folder under his mattress. But plans require a future, and Sipho's future was rotting from the inside out. Inside the small 3-roomed house at the edge of the village, the air was thick with the smell of menthol, camphor, and illness. In the corner bedroom, his mother, Grace, lay beneath 3 heavy woolen blankets. Despite the oppressive December heat, her skin, usually the deep, rich color of polished mahogany, had turned an ashen grayish yellow. Her breathing came in rugged, wet gasps that sounded like a shovel scrapping through dry gravel. The doctor at the clinic in town had used big words like pulmonary fibrosis and advanced stage, before shaking his head. He had handed Sipho a prescription for private oxygen tanks and specialized imported medication that cost more than Sipho's family had earned in the last 5 years. "I am sorry, my boy," the doctor had said, not looking Sipho in the eye. "Keep her comfortable. That is all you can do now." Sipho sat by his mother's bed, holding her hand. Her fingers were cold, the nails bluish-grey. She had worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses in town by day and brewing ginger beer for weddings by night, just to buy his school uniform. She had starved herself during the drought of 2022 so that he could eat the last of the maize meal. "Sipho," she whispered, her voice barely a thread. She did not open her eyes. "Do not waste the candle wax. Go to sleep." "I am right here, Mama," he said, pressing her hand against his forehead. He looked at the small wooden table beside her bed. There was a single, half-empty bottle of generic pain medicine and a glass of warm water. That was it. By tomorrow the bottle would be empty. By next week the room would be silent. A sudden, sharp anger flared in his chest, a hot, rebellious fire that burned away his fear. He refused to accept that this was how her story ended. He refused to let the bush take her. Leaving his mother's side, Sipho walked out into the central courtyard of the homestead. The night was dead silent, save for the rhythmic, mechanical click of a distant borehole pump. Sitting on a low plastic stool near the fence was his grandfather, Baba Kumalo. The old man was blind, his eyes clouded over with the milky white film of cataracts, but he knew the village better than anyone who could see. He spent his days listening to the wind, the birds, and the gossip of the women at the communal tap. "You are thinking of doing something foolish," Baba Kumalo said without turning his head. His voice was deep, dry, and carried the weight of 80 winters. "She is dying, Baba," Sipho said, standing behind him. "The clinic has given up." "And so you think you can find a cure where the sun does not shine?" The old man turned his clouded eyes toward the northern horizon, where the thornveld grew thick and impenetrable. "You have been listening to the boys at the taxi rank. They talk about things they do not understand. They talk about the midnight market," Sipho said, stepping closer. "They say it is real. Tabo's uncle went there when his cattle were dying of the red water tick. The next morning, his herd was healthy and his fields were green." "And what did Tabo's uncle lose 3 years later?" Baba Kumalo asked sharply. "Do they talk about that at the taxi rank? Do they tell you how his oldest son went into the bush to find a stray calf and never walked out? Do they tell you how the uncle now speaks to walls when the moon is full?" Sipho went silent. The wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves of the massive Marula tree that gave the village its name. "The midnight market is not a place for trading, Sipho," the old man whispered, his tone softening into something resembling pity. "It is a trap. It is where the abattoir, the little people who hide in the high grass, and abapanzi, the ancestors who died with anger in their hearts, come to play with the living. They do not want our money. They do not care for paper rand. They trade in weight. The weight of a soul, the weight of a memory, the weight of a life." "I have my grandfather's watch," Sipho said, reaching into his pocket. His fingers closed around the heavy, silver-plated pocket watch that had belonged to his great-grandfather, a man who had survived the deep gold mines of Johannesburg. "It is old. It is valuable." Baba Kumalo let out a long, shuddering sigh. He reached out with a trembling, spotted hand and gripped Sipho's wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. "If you go," the old man said, his voice dropping so low that Sipho had to lean down to hear him, "you must remember 3 things. If you forget them, you will become a shadow that walks the bush until the end of days." "Tell me," Sipho said. "First, once you step onto the path where the gravel road ends, you do not speak to anyone until you stand before a trader. Second, when the trade is done, you turn your back and you walk home. You do not look back, even if the heavens are falling behind you, even if you hear your own mother calling your name. Third, you must break past the boundary of the village before the cock crows. If the sun catches you on their side of the road, you belong to the market." Sipho pulled his wrist free. He looked down at the old man, then back toward the dark house where his mother lay gasping for air. "I will be back before dawn, Baba," he said. The old man did not answer. He simply picked up his walking stick and began to hum an ancient, mournful song. A song used for burying warriors who died far from home. The time was 11:45. Sipho walked down the main dirt path of Marula Ridge, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his faded denim jacket. The village was completely dark. Not a single light shone from any window. Even the stray dogs, usually loud and aggressive, were nowhere to be seen. They had crawled deep beneath cars and veranda floors, their tails tucked between their legs, whining silently in the dark. The air felt strange. It was heavy, pressurized, like the moment right before a massive high-felled thunderstorm breaks, but there were no clouds in the sky. The stars above were bright, cold and needle-sharp, but they seemed distant, as if they were shining through a thick sheet of dirty glass. He reached the end of the village. Here, the gravel road simply gave up. The tracks made by the municipal water trucks grew faint and were replaced by the narrow, twisting paths made by foraging goats and wild impala. Beyond this point lay the thornveld, hundreds of kilometers of dense grey acacia bushes, jagged rocks, and ancient baobab trees that stretched all the way to the Limpopo River. Sipho stopped at the boundary line. A single piece of rusted barbed wire, a remnant of an old colonial farm fence, hung slack between 2 rotting wooden posts. He looked at his phone. The screen flickered violently. The digital clock read 23:53. Then the screen went completely black. The battery, which had been full when he left the house, was dead. 11:53, he muttered to himself. His voice sounded thin, swallowed up instantly by the vastness of the bush. He climbed over the wire. The moment his boot touched the dirt on the other side, the temperature dropped. The suffocating summer heat vanished, replaced by a biting, dry chill that made his breath bloom into small white clouds in front of his face. The smell of the village, dry dust, cow dung, and paraffin, was replaced by something old and intoxicating. It smelled of wet river clay, burnt wild sage, and the sweet, heavy scent of overripe marula fruit fermenting on the ground. He began to walk. He walked for what felt like hours, though his lack of a watch made time elastic. The path beneath his feet shifted. The rough rocks and thorny twigs disappeared, replaced by fine, white river sand that didn't crunch when he stepped on it. It was as if the earth itself was trying to be quiet. Then he heard the sound. It started as a low, rhythmic thudding, a sound he initially mistook for his own heartbeat. But as he moved deeper into the bush, the sound grew louder, separating into distinct, uneven beats. It wasn't the sound of modern bass speakers from a tavern. It was the sound of skin on wood, the deep, resonant thrum of cowhide drums, played with a frantic, driving urgency that made the muscles in his legs want to move to the rhythm. The bush began to thin out. The jagged thorn bushes gave way to a wide, natural clearing surrounded by massive, ancient leadwood trees whose branches twisted toward the sky like skeletal fingers. Sipho stopped behind the trunk of a great baobab, his heart hammering against his ribs. The clearing was not dark. It was filled with a flickering emerald green light that didn't seem to come from any fire. It floated in the air, thousands of oversized fireflies, each the size of a sparrow, hovering in stationary clusters above a sprawling, chaotic avenue of market stalls. This was the midnight market. It looked like the bustling open-air market Sipho had seen in towns like the Hoyandu, but twisted into a nightmare. The stalls were constructed from sun-bleached animal bones, woven river reeds, and strips of rusted corrugated iron that seemed to float without support. And the people. Sipho drew back behind the tree, a cold sweat breaking out across his neck. They were not people. Some were tall, impossibly thin figures wrapped in long, tattered cloaks of black jackal fur. Their faces were entirely shadow, save for eyes that glowed with the cold, pale light of silver coins. Others were small, no taller than a man's knee, with skin like old tree bark and ears that tapered into sharp points. They scurried between the stalls like beetles, carrying heavy woven baskets on their backs. There were figures that looked human from behind, but when they turned, their faces were smooth, featureless expanses of flesh with no eyes, noses, or mouths. Yet they were communicating. A low collective hum filled the clearing, a sound like a million locusts stripping a maize field bare. "Remember the first rule," Sipho told himself, his hands shaking so hard he could barely keep them in his pockets. "Do not speak to anyone until you stand before a trader." He took a deep breath, stepped out from behind the baobab tree and entered the market. As Sipho walked down the central aisle, the green light shifted over him. The hum of the market didn't stop, but dozens of silver coin eyes turned to watch him. He kept his gaze fixed straight ahead, refusing to look directly at the things being offered on the tables, but his peripheral vision caught glimpses of the terrifying merchandise. At the first stall, a creature with the head of a crested hawk and the torso of a man was selling luck. The luck was kept in small, stoppered glass vials. Inside the glass, tiny golden sunbirds fluttered frantically, their wings beating against the walls until they died and turned into sparkling dust. At another stall, a woman whose hair was made of living green river grass was selling beauty. She held a mirror made of dark, polished water that didn't spill. A young woman, a living village girl from somewhere else, her face pale and her eyes vacant, was standing before the stall. She handed the trader a small silk pouch. When the trader opened it, Sipho saw 3 bright, bloody human teeth. The trader smiled, showing a mouth full of needle-sharp iron fangs, and poured a drop of the dark water onto the girl's face. The girl's skin instantly became flawless, glowing like pearl, but her eyes went completely white. She smiled a hollow, joyless smile and walked away into the dark. Sipho felt sick. This wasn't a market. It was an auction house for human misery. He quickened his pace, moving past stalls that smelled of copper and old meat. He saw baskets filled with black sand that could make a neighbor's crops wither overnight. He saw strings of dried hyena ears that allowed the wearer to hear secrets whispered miles away. He saw clay jars containing the last breaths of dying men, sold to those who wished to extend their own lives by a few miserable days. He began to despair. None of these things could help his mother. This was all malice and black magic. Then, at the very end of the avenue, where the green firefly light began to fade back into the oppressive blackness of the bush, he saw a small, solitary stall. The stall was nothing more than a flat slab of black granite resting on 2 large mounds of earth. Sitting behind it, on a low three-legged wooden stool, was an old woman. She was small, her spine curved like a sickle, and she was wrapped entirely in an old, weathered, traditional leopard skin blanket, the kind worn only by kings and high-ranking traditional healers. The spots on the fur were faded, stained with grease and time. Her head was covered by a thick black headscarf pulled down so low that only her mouth and chin were visible. Her skin was a map of deep, ancient wrinkles, and her lower lip was stained a dark, permanent purple from chewing wild tobacco. Unlike the other stalls, there was no crowd here. The other creatures gave this corner of the clearing a wide berth, walking in a broad arc to avoid getting too close to the granite slab. Sipho approached the table. His legs felt like lead, and his lungs burned as if he were breathing broken glass. He stopped 2 paces away and waited. The old woman did not look up. She was busy grinding something in a small stone mortar, using a pestle made from a human shin bone. The sound of the grinding scritch, scratch, scritch was inexplicably louder than the drumming behind them. "You are far from home, child of the ridge," she said. Her voice didn't sound like a monster's. It sounded like an old grandmother's voice, but it had an echo to it, as if 2 people were saying the same words at slightly different times. Sipho's breath hitched in his throat. He had found the trader. He had found the cure. But looking into those cold, reflective silver eyes, he realized the elders were right. The midnight market doesn't trade in paper money. It trades in souls. And Sipho was about to find out exactly what his mother's life was going to cost him. The trade is about to be sealed, but the hardest part of the night hasn't even begun. What will Sipho have to leave behind in the thornveld? And will he make it back to the village before the first cock crows? Don't stay lost in the dark. Subscribe right now and turn on all notifications so you don't miss the terrifying conclusion of Sipho's journey. What do you think the old woman is about to demand in exchange for the life water? Thank you for listening.